Glen Suitor, we say good evening. Grazie. Thanks for joining us again. Suits, where in the world are you today?
Yeah, I am in Florence, Italy now, and got here a couple of days ago, Maz. Really cool city. Lots and lots of young people, lots of students that are visiting all the different museums and different sites to see here, but very different vibe than Rome. This is my first trip over here, as I've mentioned before, so it's all brand new to me, but got a chance yesterday to go and see the statue of the David, and that was impressive. I know many people have, if they're listening right now, have probably heard of it. They've probably seen pictures of it. One of the most world-renowned sculptures of all time by Michelangelo. And it, you know, when I was thinking about, we went to go see it, I've seen many pictures, and I thought, you know what, I want to see it for sure live, but I've seen a lot of pictures of it, so I don't think it'll be all that big a deal. But when you get into that building and you walk up and see it, it is unbelievably impressive. I mean, it's just, first of all, the sheer size of it, the detail, the thought that Michelangelo actually carved it out of one block of marble is incredible. At times for those statues, the artists would put them together, and there would be different pieces that they'd add together afterwards. But this was one huge block of marble. Other very famous sculptors couldn't do it, and he took it on. And when you walk in there and you see the detail, and then you think of the story and the look on his face, his expression. I mean, it's the story of David and Goliath, of course. And it's this statue in the Academia is just before he's about to fight the giant. This statue was carved in at that moment. That's the time that they were envisioning. So he has his sling on his shoulder, and he has the rocks in his other hand, and he's about to sling the rock to knock the giant out, and then cut his head off. And the look and the expression in his face is absolutely amazing. It's basically saying, "Bring it on," with a guy that's 100 feet bigger than him and all of that, because it was the myth is that it was David and Goliath. So you can't take your eyes off it when you see it live. I mean, ultra impressive. I love the story because it's the ultimate underdog, and he went on to be a king.
Now, Suits, some of the adventures, a couple of the texts that we got, and some people had never been to Europe before, and I'm curious about this as well. When you went to go take the tour of the Colosseum, what does that cost? Like when you went to see the statue of David yesterday, is it free to get into the museum, or what does that cost? Because some, like the museums here that we kind of know, you can just wander in and there is no charge.
Yeah, no, there is charges for those things, and it depends on what you want to do. I think you can go into the Colosseum for, anywhere between about $18 to $80 if you're getting guided tours and things like that. We had a guided tour in the Colosseum that took us below to where the locker rooms were, where the gladiators and the animals would be kept before they were brought out onto the stage. So we had sort of a tour that was another level. In fact, I don't think this tour has been open for very long. I think this has been a tour that just was opened recently. So we paid a little bit more to make sure we could see all of that. So there's different levels of that, but most of the major museums, just like yesterday at the David, we had to pay there, and I believe that was around $40, $50, something like that. So there are costs for the major museums, some of the different churches. I can't remember if we paid to go to the Vatican. I think we walked in there, and we did have to pay to get into St. Peter's, the church. So there are some there are some charges. You can walk around within the Vatican without paying, but to get into certain areas you have to pay. So, yeah, it's not cheap, and I know that a lot of people can't do it. We've been planning this for years and years, so I've been able to save a whole bunch of pop bottles and make sure we had enough money to do it. But it's a once in a lifetime thing. Thing for me to be able to see it. So yeah, you're going to pay for the tours.
Hey, you know what? I was just curious because obviously, you got to maintain these places. It's so funny when you mentioned that you had to pay to get into the Vatican. I thought we covered off last week that forgiveness was free. Maybe that was a different conversation. But I want to know, since you're in Italy there, have you had, I'm not sure if you're a coffee guy, but my wife said when she lived there that the coffee, it's outstanding. Like, you're not going to get any better. Have you had any great coffee since you've been there, Suits?
Well, only every single morning. Sometimes, sometimes I joke with my buddy I'm traveling with, who is Italian, and his family and his ancestry is from Lucca in Italy, which isn't that far from here, I don't think. But when I talk and joke with him, I say, is there any chance we can find some A, good coffee, B, good wine, and C, good food when we're in Italy? Well, those three boxes were checked immediately and have been checked at every meal, every breakfast cappuccino or latte or whatever you have in the morning. Always fantastic. And here's the other thing that I didn't realize that I love so much. These morning pastries and all the different sort of desserts that come with morning, lunch, or dinner. I hope I'm not adding too many LBs here because, yikes, the food is unbelievable. There's a sandwich shop that you can buy for $14. You can buy this sandwich that, seriously, you eat one sandwich, you're pretty much good for the day. And they're all over the place in Italy. We saw them in the airport. We've seen them here in Florence, and also had one from the same place in Rome. So outstanding pastas. We had a big steak dinner last night, which was fantastic. And yeah, They know how to do the food, the wine, and the coffee. No question.
All right. Before we get into sports, what do the next couple of days look like for the Glen Suitor European travel itinerary?
Well, we're in Florence, as we just talked about, and that means there's a few clothing stores here. So what we've realized now is that we're going to have to go and buy another suitcase. So it looks like I'll be checking an extra bag on the next leg. And that's only because the choice in tie, I mean, I'm going to have a whole new look of ties for the upcoming CFL season that I'm only buying for on-air stuff. But the next leg is to pack all that stuff up and figure it out tomorrow. And then we fly from Florence to London Florence to Paris, and then we're going to rent a car in Paris and drive to Normandy. So the next leg is the chance to pay homage in Normandy, go to all the beaches, all of the cemeteries and memorials. And we actually want to try and make the drive to Vimy Ridge as well and do the same there. This is a real important leg for me in the journey, too, because of how much I support the military and got a chance to work with the squadron up in Cold Lake, Alberta, as an honorary colonel for the 417 Squadron. So I've got this great relationship with the military, and this will be a chance to go and pay homage to the men and women that sacrificed everything for our freedom.
Glenn, as we switch into sports, some sad news. We found out yesterday that 10-year CFL veteran, and he was a dominant force when he played, Jearld Baylis, who had a small stint with the Riders, ended up passing away. Did you ever play with Baylis when you were still playing?
Yes. Yeah, Jearld Baylis. Well, first of all, let's talk about the person, because that's, to me, the most important aspect. And whether it's when we have to have these conversations when someone passes, or, when we're talking about them as former teammates and they're off doing other things in the world. But I think the person is the first thing that's most important. And Jearld was such a fantastic teammate. And I know it may sound to listeners at times that I use that phrase and talk about guys as great teammates quite often, but I honestly don't. I mean, it sounds like it's taken for granted, but it's really not. If you're a great teammate, I think that's the greatest compliment that I can give anybody, because it means so much. And anyone who's played organized sports and team sports knows what I'm talking about. And if you don't, I think from watching, and you haven't played sports, I think from watching from a distance, the great teams. When the great teams win championships, it's because they're together and they're on the same page and they're great teammates with each other. And they trust each other. So, that's first and foremost for me. Jearld was the guy that you'd sit in the locker room after making a mistake in a game, and he'd be one of the first to come and, give you that pat on the shoulder, say that, forget about it, let's move on, doesn't matter, we'll get it the next game, the next play, whatever it is. But always kind of had a smile on his face, always happy to be at work. So that's infectious. You're walking around the locker room, and sometimes it gets into the sort of the dregs of the season, and you're trying to pick yourself up and stay motivated. And he was always in there with the smile, ready to work and ready to play. So you had to sort of follow that example. And then as a player on the field, just wow. I mean, 4-time All-Star. But outside of the accolades like that, just an every down player. An every down player. And before we came on the air, Maz, I thought you made a great comparison with Micah Johnson, because they have very similar body shape. They were both very, very powerful, sort of low center of gravity for defensive linemen, but had tremendous quickness. And that's one of the things that Micah Johnson has done so well, is that he's able to move that massive, strong body of his like a linebacker or even a DB at times. And when offensive linemen have to deal with a guy that's that big and can power rush or bull rush, but is also so quick that they can go around him in a heartbeat, it's almost impossible to consistently block a player like that. And Jearld Baylis was that type of player. He low center of gravity, tremendous strength and size for his, for being his height that he was, but the quickness of a DB or a linebacker. And that combination is Micah Johnson. I think it's a great comparison.
When Baylis was at the top of his game, and I remember this. Now, this was in the era of not all the games were televised. Like, it's not like it was today. There was no internet. The highlights were shoddy, spotty at best. But I remember him just blowing up other offenses. He was that type of player that could just dominate and shut down, making your job, Glenn, obviously easier. If Baylis is blowing up the play at the line of scrimmage, the ball is never, ever getting thrown, or never getting close to you. As a teammate, how much would you love when you would see the magic happen? And it's like, that's Baylis again. Nope. That play's going nowhere.
Yeah. Well, it's a great point, because I say many times when covering the game now, if you can get pressure with 3 or 4, then you can do all kinds of exotic type of coverage behind that. So whether it's linebackers and DBs in combination or man and zone combinations, if you have to blitz, then you lose a lot of those combination coverages because you've occupied the line of scrimmage with more players. So, that's a simplistic way to explain it, but that's what Jearld Baylis and a guy like Micah Johnson does. And Baylis was fantastic at it because Jearld would not only demand a double team, but when he beat the double team, that meant the offense would have to keep their back in as well. So the tailback couldn't get out in a pattern or in a route. The double team on the D-line meant that the other three D-linemen had one-on-ones on every play. And Baylis was still beating that three-on-one mismatch. They were trying to load him up to make sure they couldn't stop him. But then we'd sit and watch plays. And here's the best part about it, Maz, and this is what I meant off the top, is that as a player, when we talk about him as a player, he never took a play off. Like, I think most of the time D linemen almost have to take, at times, a play off. You hope that they don't, and you don't want them to, but they're human. And if you're getting blocked like that every single down at those collisions at the line of scrimmage, at some point you're peaking up and you're not going full because you have to take that second to catch your breath. And Baylis never did that. He never, ever did that. So when we'd watch film and we'd watch tape, back then it was almost film. now it's video. But when we watched that, every single down, Baylis was beating those double teams or triple teams, and he never took a play off. And that's how you become really a great teammate first and foremost, is that you put the full effort in. You're all in, all the chips in the middle of the table. He was that guy. So that would pull a whole bunch of people, including yours truly, right into that middle of the table with him. And then when you combine that with a Bobby Jerson and guys like that, and they're all following in that example, that's how you win a championship.
The CFL Invitational Combine is happening tomorrow. There are 3 players from Saskatchewan vying for the chance to get the invite to the CFL Combine in Regina. You've been around the game a long time. What's more important, the Underwear Olympics and the drills they're going to run, or an interview to find out about character and personality? Because as you just spoke, it takes both if you're going to be an impact player in this league.
Well, I hope the players are listening, and what I would say to them is both are important, but if you don't run the fastest 40 time and you walk out of the interview process where the coaches in that process and general manager say to themselves, I think this kid is ready to give us everything he has. He's a good talent. That's why we're testing him. And walking out of that interview, I think he'll go through a wall to try and win and be a great teammate. And getting back to the Jearld conversation and being a great teammate, if the the young men that go in there to those interviews, if they keep in the back of their mind always, how do I always portray that I'm going to be a great teammate no matter what? If you ask me to cover kicks, I'll do it. If you ask me to sweep up the locker room after the game, no problem. If you ask me to help with the equipment, getting on the bus, and also run scout team, no problem. I'll love it. Give me any opportunity you can. You keep with that as your baseline, you'll walk out of that room and the coaches will say, this kid is ready to commit to this team and give us everything he has. I think he's going to be worth a look. That's the step. And so to answer your question, I think the interview and how you carry yourself in that interview is probably, well, let's put it this way. It would be more important to me if I was a coach or a general manager sitting in that room. It would definitely be more important to me. Listen, the difference between a 4.5 and a 4.6 is the blink of an eye. I know coaches get all excited about fast 40 times. I think it's a bit of I don't know. I just don't think it should be emphasized as much as it is, because the difference is a split second, and you can make up a whole second if your mind's right, if you're playing from the shoulders up. So be confident when you walk into the interview, be a leader when you walk into the interview, but be humble and ready to do whatever's asked of you to become a great teammate.
One of the things that always got me, especially about running the 40 time in football, and if you're on defense, Glenn, we've seen it. We've seen it in Rider Nation. Some guys with speed, but couldn't tackle. I care that you can tackle and that you're sticky. I don't care. Nobody's got a stopwatch on in the stands in the Labor Day game when it's the fourth quarter and we need to make a stop, okay? When it's one-on-one, we need you to tackle. And with the NFL Combine being on right now, and Curtis, I don't know if you have the chance to pull this up, the most famous picture from 25 years ago, what do they call him, a milky Tom Brady? He's just like a bag of milk. There's no muscle tone there, just in his gray shorts and all of that. What is he, a 6th or 7th round pick? Was never supposed to be anything, and then look what that turned into. So I agree with you. That interview part and with the character, all ready to go, because usually if you get to this point, everybody has the talent. It would between your ears whether or not you can turn that talent into something that, you know, you can display it at the right time. So, yeah.
You know, Maz. Sorry, Maz. Yeah, the other thing I was just going to mention about that, it's funny you say DB, because the DB starts every play going backwards. So when you run your 40, you don't start your 40 time going backwards. So I'm not sure, you know, why that's emphasized as much as it is. But, you know, I get it. Speed is speed, and it's good to have it. And maybe I feel this way because I didn't have much of it. I don't know.
You know, Suits, you know, Rider Nation, where we want the hellacious hits. We want the thunder. We want all of that. I said that's the stuff that makes the TSN top 10 or the plays of the year. Not dudes running down the sidelines as fast as they can. We want that hit over the middle that stops somebody in their tracks, and then they are looking around like, what just happened? That number. Riders announced today they're doing a bunch of their free agent camps down in the States like they usually do every year. And I find it interesting. The very last one is on May the 4th, and then training camp is going to open on the 11th. Do you honestly think that with just a week ahead of when camp opens, that somebody could be discovered, and obviously if they had a passport, could get a plane ticket to Saskatoon to potentially start camp with the Riders?
You know, I do, because, first of all, I would think that the club would make sure that the passport situation is cleared before they're in the camp, so that if they are discovered that late in the process, that they could be brought up to Canada and have no problem crossing the border. So that would be taken care of, I would think. And then the next step is absolutely. I mean, you know, in those camps, when you do the testing, you've already seen a ton of game video. And to our point with the 40, the game video to me is way more important. I've seen guys that run 4.8s that can run by all the defenders to go make the tackle because they want to more. And that's what you're looking for when you're watching film on a defensive player. You know, how much does a receiver want to win the jump ball? Those are the type of things you see when you watch their video. And that'll all have been done before they go and see them live. The live part is just to get a sense of how they move, you know, when you're in person, but also that interview process, you know, the discussion on how you feel about Canada, how you feel about Canadian football. You know, sometimes I think you can tell if a guy is so disappointed he didn't make it down south that, you know, maybe he won't be mentally strong enough to come up here and put that all aside and be ready to give everything he's got in Canada. So, you know, I think all those judgments are made much easier when you're in-person interviews. So but as far as discovering a guy a week before camp, absolutely. You can do it. And those guys down there will be in shape. They'll be ready to go to camp. So they're staying in shape right now as we speak.
They'll have no idea where they're going, but they're sure going to love it when they get here, especially if they end up making the club. All right, Suits, safe travels. We'll check in with you again next week.